观众大家好，非常欢迎来到台北双年展。那刚才听完洪广基教授非常精彩的演讲之后呢，非常巧合的是，接下来的这位讲者他是来自卢安达的艺术家。那 Christian 他虽然来自卢安达，但他现在绝大多数的时间都是待在伦敦。那他自己的艺术创作呢，针对了卢安达的历史，尤其是在后殖民以及后大屠杀这样子的议题上面的讨论相当的多。那另外一方面呢，他的艺术创作也是针对了共同合作、共同生产这样子的方法上面去进行了很多跟卢安达、跟社区、社群之间的合作关系。那接下来让我们把握时间，就请让我们一起用热烈的掌声来欢迎。
All right. Thank you very much for this kind invitation to be here, and thank you also for being here. My name is indeed Christian Nyampeta. I am an artist and a researcher. And today I would like to speak a bit about elements of intellectual histories and the natures of thinking beyond the limits of living together, particularly within Rwandan philosophy. I am a little bit nervous on the one hand because of course it's a great pleasure, but the room is also imposing. And the other aspect is that clearly I am an artist and I am going to talk about history, philosophy and theology, all of which I'm not qualified to do. So I implore your patience and sympathy. So I think the presentation can be summarized indeed as an attempt to explore the thinking practices that attempt to transgress beyond the limits of living together. And I would like to do that through first asking ourselves a question, which is how to live in a reality that can be really described as the afterlife rather than life itself. So I want to posit a hypothesis that our contemporary moment can best be described as an afterlife. And I would like to do so first by a brief overview of the method that I use, and then an introduction to the current practices within philosophy in Rwanda, and then the histories that have informed the formation of this thinking or have denaturalized these practices and what it means today, and then concluding with the aesthetic interventions within this field. So all of this it should take about half an hour, followed by hopefully questions or interactions of some kind. So in general, since 2012, I have engaged in conversations with Rwandan philosophers, artists and theorists at their homes, universities and cultural institutions. Some of our conversations have focused on the subject of rhythm and its role in subjecthood and belonging. So my films, Comment vivre ensemble, Words After the World, and A Flower Garden of All Kinds of Loveliness Without Sorrow, bring together extracts and fictions from these dialogues whereby rhythm is a metaphor for hospitality, class, ethnicity, and race. Rhythm is, in this case, a regulating device consisting of subjective and objective criteria. As such, rhythm can give us insight in how to live together with those we don't share a rhythm, or outlooks on how to structure our private, public spaces, times, memories, and the formation of our own subject. The title, How to Live Together, references the lectures held at the Collège de France by the French literary critic Roland Barthes in 1978. There, idiorhythmie, which means one's own rhythm, is the subject of these lectures. Idiorhythmie is a notion of political theology denoting ascetic formation of the desert fathers and mothers that flourished in the 4th century in the Egyptian desert. It's a practice that informed the development of the Christian monasticism before the Benedictine. But for Barthes, and I believe also a little bit for myself, although differently, this allows to simulate a community in which every member has the right to live according to her or his own rhythm without being expelled by the group. So far about the method. Then a brief overview of the philosophical practices, by far, not all of them, but those with whom I've engaged in Rwanda. Philosophers in Rwanda tend to have important positions in the field of education and other infrastructures for the formation of the subject and the standardizing processes of society. Their writing are used as textbooks in universities nationally, and some of them even lead educational programs for senior police officers and the army. And like the work of the African colleagues, and here I paraphrase the Gabonese philosopher Grégoire Biogo, the writing of these philosophers seem to highlight what the world is ceasing to be without yet understanding this end. The thinking of these philosophers fights against the permanent degradation of life and of living together, but also against the threat to life caused by the disappearance of our relation to each other and the habitable environments on our planet. This philosophy revives what would otherwise be lost, and it carries a meaning and a promise which compel us to rethink life. So the themes explored by these philosophers include authenticity, development, education, generosity, history, memory, testimony, and witnessing. These references and interests of these philosophers reflect the influences acquired through their formations in Rwanda, in Bangui, in Kinshasa, Yaoundé, but also in Rome, Bamberg, and elsewhere. They are versed as such in Western Christian idioms, while also they cultivate their own thematics and treatises that address the local urgencies which equally respond to worldly events from the perspectives of their own localities. And here I would like to also give space to some of these philosophers. So I'll play a short clip.
Cette question. Lorsque nous essayons de voir, chaque fois j'essaie de voir même ce qui se passe actuellement en Europe, ça m'a toujours étonné de voir comment les Européens parlent toujours de la crise des migrants. Ils ne se posent pas la question de savoir pourquoi il y a des migrants, pourquoi quelqu'un peut se contenter de vivre, courir le risque de mourir, mais pour arriver en Europe. Il fallait plutôt voir, c'est la crise de l'humanité. Oui, parce que la crise n'est pas en Europe, la crise est en Syrie, la crise est en Europe et en Afrique, où les gens n'ont pas d'espoir des lendemains. Et leur vie égale à la mort. C'est pour cela qu'en fait, si jamais la vie avait une importance pour eux, on ne quitterait pas son pays pour aller mourir dans la Méditerranée. On ne quitterait pas son pays pour marcher, je ne sais pas combien de kilomètres à pied et fuir. Non, pas du tout. C'est parce qu'il y a l'insécurité qui est vis-à-vis, donc qui est là. et qui motive les gens à dire peut-être on peut mourir, mais on ne mourra pas tous. Il y aura il y aura des survivants. Alors là, il faut refuser la misère. Et d'ailleurs, je pense, c'est dans ce sens-là que je pense aussi la philosophie. Pratiquer la philosophie, c'est-à-dire, là où on est, refuser la misère. Aider les autres à refuser la misère. Et aussi chercher toujours des outils, comment faire. Bon, pour moi, je cultive mon jardin. J'essaie de voir, je réfléchis avec d'autres gens comment faire. Au moins pour s'accepter. Voilà. Lorsque je dis je cultive mon jardin, c'est peut-être aussi c'est la pensée de Calvin quand il dit qu'il faut au moins planter un arbre fruitier. On lui pose la question, si demain c'était la fin du monde, qu'est-ce que tu ferais aujourd'hui? Je planterai un arbre. Même si c'est la fin du monde, si ce n'est pas la fin, je vais jouir des fruits de mon arbre. Et mon point de vue, c'est de dire, si nous essayons d'éduquer nos enfants dès le bas âge à juste planter un arbre, absolument, il va toujours faire tout ce qu'il peut pour que son arbre produise le fruit. Il ne va pas lancer une bombe où il a planté un arbre, où il a fait son jardin. Et on ne va pas le convaincre facilement qu'il va trouver une richesse ailleurs. Parce qu'il aura envie de protéger sa propriété. C'est dans ce sens-là que je parle de planter d'arbres. D'accord. Voilà.
So that was Kinet Obed Nikiza, a philosopher in Butare. And there is, of course, much more to say about the thought proposed there. But I might return to that. But what I would like to retain is the question of, indeed, what would we do if tomorrow is the end of the world? And I believe that perhaps that has happened already, and that somehow the figure of the survivor is the paradigm of today. And so the question of how to live together within these philosophies is a shared concern. And these philosophical works tend to imply, but also to contest, a consensus by outlining the meaning of this consensus, not only in relation to the Western contexts in which they're educated, but also with regard to the extreme situation that led to and followed the genocide that took place in Rwanda in 1994, whereby victims and perpetrators have had to cohabit now, of course, with much further progress and reach. But what I find fascinating and interesting also to study is an aspect of their life, of these philosophers, which is their devotion to Christendom. And I believe that the reason for this Christendom within these intellectual lives is the intertwined histories of education or modernism with Christianity. So here I borrow the words of Karesera Kafuahirehi, a philosopher, Congolese, living in Canada, who writes that these philosophers, the institutions they represent and their teaching reflect an allegiance to Christianity. This is because most pioneers and contemporary leading figures of African philosophy were formed in missionary institutions. This stamp onto the general regional and Rwandan intellect is still widely actual. The dominant ideologies and the types of social sciences privileged in education also reflect this Christian idealism. It reaches back to the colonial era when churches, cloisters, and seminaries were established as sites of ideological conversions. However, this colonial enterprise of cultural conversions motioned through Christianity was appropriated by Africans who perceived it as a vehicle of modernity or found in it tools to resist colonialism and domination, that is, tools of liberation. And yet, missionary institutions were, and still are, technologies of transmission and enforcement of colonial exploitation. Writing in 1979, the then priest Smargarde Mboinhege attests that the missionary activities had a common goal with that of the colonizers. For Rwandans to become a Christian was not only a matter of conversion to Christianity, it was a total act of abandoning imicho ya Kinyarwanda, meaning the Rwandan rhythms, which were suspected, rightly or wrongly, to be vectors of paganism. And so between 1900 and 1960, the Rwandan Christian moved toward a cultural death. Through the Christian religion, the new Rwandan Christian was formed at school, at work, to become an admirer of the white, and to become his often clumsy imitator. Becoming a Christian meant speaking differently, eating differently, dressing differently, praying differently. More dramatically, becoming Christian meant to hate one's own tradition and to admire all what is European. It's suggested that despite this devastating transformation, what is properly African was not fully erased. Also, the appropriation, adaptation, and cultivation of Christianity by the new African Christians led to a distinct emergence of an African Christianity and modernity that used the same arguments to fight against the colonial injustices. But other thinkers find that the civil wars, genocides, massacres that plague Africa today are signs of an endemic political sphere that is a product of foreign institutions enforcing an external order onto the African societies. Nevertheless, it remains that Christianity, which arrived in Africa within the context of colonial exploitation and subjugation and domination, is now profoundly linked to the African experience of history in its multiple manifestations: spiritual, social, political, ethical, and intellectual. Therefore, all analysis of African issues that does not take into account the Christian or Islam factor, as well as African religious systems, ends up by renouncing an understanding of African society's dynamics. As such, I think a theological perspective is useful in studying how to live together today. And in doing so, I think it's imperative to study Christianity within this renewed understanding as something that is by now African. And so we can then say that Christianity is the rhythm of enforced modernity. So Christianity is the rhythm of modernity. And the institution of Christianity erased Rwandan rhythms, imico ya Kinyarwanda, such that Christianity caused the cultural death of the Rwandan ways of being, meaning the nature of thinking, doing, but also the nature itself or the relation to it, decimating existing life practices that didn't separate its expression in social action, nor readily classified as theological, political, or sociological, and I would add natural as well. Christianity was deployed as a powerful tool for the transformation of physical and human spaces, and as an institution of the domestication of bodies and minds, forcing the integration into a manner of being, living, and thinking presented as the actualization of God, of the Word, and as the truth and norm of all authentic existence. So my hypothesis then is, if Christianity can dominate and erase existing rhythms, meaning forms of life, life practices, spaces and times, then Christianity is itself, and the apparatus that surrounds it, a rhythm. It created a reality that fragments the society into forms of governance that disregard the right to life. That for some thinkers, this fragmentation explains in part the extraordinary flare in the civil wars and atrocities in Africa in recent years. And so, according to another Congolese priest and philosopher, Benezet Bujo, in the genuine African tradition, the genocide in Rwanda would be impossible. Palaver and rites of reconciliation in the name of the ancestors would ensure that the worst would be avoided and peace re-established. In the images there we see the missionaries who of course turned military as well, and that's particularly during the fight of the First World War, where Rwandans were then fighting against the Belgians who were occupying Congo at the time. Perhaps the recognized and concealed genocide, massacres, inter-community clashes, rape, violence are signifiers of the obvious failure of modernity, Christianity, and other rhythmic apparatuses enforced upon the African by the colonial governments of before and their contemporary military technocratic surrogates. This reality then compels us to rethink rhythm, its religiosity, and its effects on the subjecthood, the community, and governance. So then, how was rhythm understood before Christianity, and how is rhythm understood today? In order to do so, I would also like to play another short clip.
La générosité, c'est un concept assez intéressant, très légendaire en Afrique, mais c'est aussi exagéré parce que la générosité, c'est le propre de l'homme. Tout homme est naturellement généreux. La générosité, c'est la gratuité, c'est la liberté. Exister, c'est être généreux. Je crois qu'il n'y a pas d'autre choix. Parce que lorsqu'on est posé à l'existence, on a déjà commencé à contracter des dettes. Je le dis souvent, qu'exister, c'est être en dette. Exister, c'est être en dette. Regardez, l'oxygène, l'oxygène, la planète Terre, la lumière, tout cela, nous l'avons trouvé sur place. La lumière, l'oxygène, pour ne citer que ça. La pesanteur qui nous permet de rester toujours en équilibre. C'est assez intéressant, c'est la source des dettes. Mais aussi les œuvres d'art, les livres que nous lisons, ce n'est pas nous qui les avons écrits, les films que nous visionnons, tout ce qui nous entoure, c'est vraiment des formes, des rappels que nous contractons des dettes. Et être généreux pour un homme, ce n'est pas question de choix. Je trouve que c'est plus une obligation parce qu'en venant au monde, on a trouvé que l'univers était plein. L'univers était assez accueillant. Et en revenant justement à ma carrière d'étudiant, je rappelle souvent à mes jeunes que nous sommes venus à l'université lire des livres, et faire des articles, lire des livres, et être enseigné, rencontrer des professeurs. Et cela est un rappel avec insistance que jamais la science, les œuvres d'art, la vie ne s'arrête pas avec moi. Je me dis, je suis venu, j'ai lu des livres, et après, celui qui viendra après moi, qu'est-ce qu'il lira? J'ai fréquenté les universités, et celui qui viendra après moi, où est-ce qu'il fréquentera? J'ai visionné un beau film, et après moi, celui qui viendra, qu'est-ce qu'il aura comme beau film que j'ai laissé? En fait, c'est cela que j'appelle une dette. Chaque geste posé, chaque bénéfice reçu, c'est à la fois un bien, mais aussi un contrat de dette.
That was Issei Nzeyimana, again in the same film, Comment Vivre Ensemble from 2015. And here, Issei Nzeyimana, philosopher, suggests that to exist is to be generous. And here I'm trying to explore what rhythm was before and after, before and after Christianity. And so Nzeyimana suggests that to exist is to be generous. Existence, which could also be called Ubuntu, which is a shared concept on the continent. To be human, existence is a rhythmic bond of giving, receiving, giving. And Nzeyimana calls this rhythm Injana. Kuja means to go, to walk, to move, to put into motion, and na means with. For Nzeyimana, Injana contributes to the structuring of religious, pedagogical, social, political, and economic bodies. In Injana, freedom exists only if the same freedom is extended to the other. To live is to live with, and existence is the coordination of these rhythms. Politics is the rhythmic deliberation of time and space with the other. And so Injana takes hold only if all the members of the society have equal access to civic, cultural, economic, legal, or legislative provisions. Its sociality presupposes an equality in the ritualization of memory, in the recognition of differences, and in the redistribution of resources. These provisions should also anticipate the needs and arrival of the other, of the future situated beyond our own sociality, outside of our own rhythm. Injana suggests that generosity, ubuntu, giving, receiving, giving, is the practice of an anticipatory and reciprocal mutuality as the precondition of being. So at this moment, maybe it's worth reflecting on the general discipline of philosophy, but then again, I'm not truly qualified to do so, but I'm going to try to situate the understanding of rhythm within the canon. But at the same time, it is true that the discipline of philosophy has contributed to the wholesale dehumanization of Africans, and it is an intellectual tradition that seems to downplay the many contributions from women, at least historically, and other marginalized social groups. However, philosophy existed well before its delimitation as solely a Western practice. The survival of humanity depended and still depends on our sensitivity and on our ways of making sense of our own feelings and our own worlds. Whether these practices are called philosophy or otherwise, intellect is a shared human faculty. So therein, in the histories of Western philosophy which engendered Christianity, which is why it's important to study it, such as the Greek rhythmos, rhythm meant a distinctive form, disposition, and proportion, a way or a manner of flowing, of doing or unfolding, of becoming. It is the transitional disposition of something animated, such as the form of a movement, the form of an attitude, a form of life, but also someone's character or nature. Crudely speaking, and again, the philosopher among ourselves can correct me, please, there may be three traditions of rhythm. One tradition reads rhythm structurally, meaning it renders reality in its totality from the outside, and this we can call the structuralist tradition. Another likely tradition considers rhythm as means for describing experience and phenomena from within reality, so from the inside. And here rhythm is an emancipatory, exteriorizing, and interventional force. We can talk later about who I think can be grouped within these traditions. But there's also a third possible tradition which regards rhythm as a generative work of invention. Hereby, rhythm can support the emergence of a new subject and a new reality. I'm not sure where Indiana really sits, but supposing it is towards the third tradition of a work of invention, I still think that the paradox remains, because like all rhythms, Indiana is also bound to the paradoxes of tradition, the toxic references, and the negative aspects of its intertwined histories of emergence, certainly including religiosity as well. However, unwelcome as it is, the paradox of Indiana or rhythm as a device for studying how to live together could help to decentralize the dominance of Christianity as the rhythm of modernity. This is so because if Indiana can offer meditations on the limits of modernity, history, and subjecthood, then thinking through Indiana is also a self-criticizing practice of learning about our own intellectual histories and our own contribution in the formation of a supposedly universal subject and its institutions. So thinking Indiana is performing a critical elegy for our own intellectual formation and inheritance as formerly colonized Christians, modernists, postmodernists, and so on, because having been colonized doesn't exonerate us from doing the work of self-critique. And in doing so, we then arrive at what I find puzzling moment, whereby the historical and current forceful realities have materialized new experiences. So Islam, Christianity are by now actually also African experiences, in the same way that, as the Senegalese philosopher Souleymane Bachir Diagne, who lives in New York, proposes, English, French, or Portuguese are also African. And the reverse is also true. As such, to paraphrase the French philosopher Séverine Kodjo-Granvaux, perhaps what is at stake in this cohabitation of both flawed and promising histories, knowledges and feelings, is the making of indiscipline, understood as the transgression of disciplinary boundaries rather than a disintegration of disciplines. So by studying Indiana in the presence of historical and current realities such as Christianity and other destructive rhythms of civilization or progress, we perform what the Cameroonian philosopher proposes, namely the crossing, which I could interpret as translation really, a notion that is described as thoughts that refuse the withdrawal of identity, neurotic and claiming, as well as the dissolution into a coagulating universalism. So I would say that that can be some of the uses of studying living together from one perspective. So precisely because despite the brutalities committed in the name of Christianity or any other system as the rhythm of modernity, call for a complete rejection of Christianity in African societies, cultures, and politics. Because, to me, the possible benefits of Christianity throughout the Great Lake regions, of which Rwanda belongs, pale in the face of the atrocities committed by the missionaries and the Christian or Muslim African leaders and their willful or manipulated followers. And yet, in the wake of these terrible encounters with modernity's devastating rhythm, those tasked with the formation of our subjects are still Christian. So as we saw in Comment vivre ensemble, two of the philosophers are actually priests. One is a pastor, and I have also, we've had conversation with nuns and other religious. So then how to understand this contradiction? I would say that this contradiction simply highlights or foregrounds the historical mutualities and reciprocities in a way that to think Christianity today or to think Africa involves thinking Europe, and thinking Rwanda involves thinking Congo. Thinking Congo involves thinking Arusha, it involves thinking the Sahara, as one of the philosophers was doing. It involves thinking the Mediterranean, the Hague. It involves thinking the West. And so, again, this seems to be the suggestion of some other thinker, again, retaining Diagne, for whom thinking Africa is thinking across languages in such a way that to think is to translate. And I do see translation not only in relation to moving language into another, but also formal and material realities. And to me, this is the rhythmic thought of the crossing or in discipline, because the reality is so fused and so intertwined that it's not really possible to retain only one discipline. So it makes sense that, as such, the translative reading of How to Live Together suggests that Indiana is but one of the plural synonyms of a possible movement of relations to life, to the world. So it is but a prototype of relations. My thinking is that by practicing with the Rwandan philosophers and their regional colleagues in their thought of thinking life anew through undertaking the crossing of the present, we may revisit translation as relocation, namely the removal of a saint body or relics to a new place. So at the origin, translation is a theological practice, and because theology presupposes demons, the other of nature, then there is a demonological imperative in this practice of thinking and inhabiting the rhythm of living together and its material, practical, and theoretical synonyms. So I'll go back to the question, how to live together in a reality of the post-colonial and the post-genocide, and globally in an age where intense levels of crisis are the norm rather than the exception. In other words, how to live together in our contemporary moment in which life is experienced as an afterlife. In Rwanda, the sight of, or the invocation of bones, and of course I am slightly exaggerating, but to make the point, constitutes an elementary part of the ecology. My own forehead is literally fractured, permanently injured at the level of the body, thought, emotions, and memory by a blow at the hand of fellow Rwandans. Taking such displacement of the bone literally, materially, and metaphorically, it makes sense to ask how to live together with the forced movement, crossing, and relocation of our bones. What roles remain for those we considered saints? What does their relic signify today, and what does it interpret? What demons threaten our relics and our ghosts in such a way that their remains have to be relocated? So here my point is to say that our ghosts essentially are so fused that it's hard to know where to bury one and which one is alive and which one is not so. In such a way that to bury one would imply to bury a living one. So there is a necessity for an indisciplinary study of what is what. So maybe I shouldn't end with answers or conclusions, but with further questions which are here and there posed or explored tangentially sometimes, and sometimes evocatively, and sometimes directly, within the some of the ongoing aesthetic interventions that include recording practice. I would not call them videos or films, but some kind of recording practices that also attempt to borrow or take seriously other forms of knowledge that include songs, music, speech, etc. So when I say philosophy, it's not actually just those who write books, but those who also perform otherwise. And I believe that that's where the task of indiscipline or translation resides, certainly within aesthetic practices that attempt to think beyond the limits of living together. So in finishing, I would like to leave us with a short clip of a performance by a lyricist that was held during a conference that I recently organized in Rwanda that attempted to put in picture the histories of art education, and again, they're intertwined histories with changes in natures of thinking, doing, but also how the world itself looked. In one of the pictures we saw, I didn't highlight it, there was moments where the construction of churches was presented, and then where trees were torn apart, which in itself caused a lot of tension. So in other words, the building of architectures inscribed themselves within the destroying of nature that augmented the clashes between those who lived there before. So in conclusion, or in guise of a conclusion, I would like to leave us with a song that I'm sure none of us are going to understand, including myself, but maybe that's the work that's needed to allow us to listen without much, without thinking that we can understand immediately. I wish I could. And part of the work is to translate and to make it accessible as resources of knowledge. But for now, it's only going to be a performance. So thank you very much. I'll leave it here. All right, just a small anecdote. The instrument being played is called inanga, and I would say that's the opposite of a Christian instrument, in a sense that some of my colleagues who were helping were reluctant to touch it because it's precisely seen as one such instrument of the rhythm of paganism that was fought against within Christianity. So it does make sense to study what such knowledges and histories mean today. So I think that's a very rich resource, as important as a text, as a book that might be written by another philosopher. So I would like to end there, and I hope that there are questions later which we can discuss with more ease. Thank you very much.